The night had a strange, almost electric stillness to it, the kind of quiet that makes even the smallest sound echo like a gunshot. In the sprawling hills of Brentwood, where manicured lawns meet modernist mansions, no one expected terror to strike behind the polished gates of a household that seemed untouchable. Yet, inside the luxurious Reiner estate, something unthinkable had just occurred. A family, celebrated and admired, had been torn apart, and whispers of betrayal, madness, and secrecy were about to explode into a story no one would forget. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this: the grandiose chandeliers casting long shadows across marble floors, the smell of fresh-cut flowers drifting through open windows, and the faint hum of a security system that promised protection from every external threat. And yet, none of it mattered when danger had already found its way inside. How could something so horrific happen in a place that seemed so safe, so curated, so perfect? That is the question that now hangs over the city like a thick, choking fog. It all began that Sunday evening. The Reiner's daughter, usually the cheerful presence at the heart of the family, had returned home after running errands. She expected the usual scene. Her parents laughing in the kitchen, the scent of dinner filling the air, maybe a playful argument over who forgot to buy the last carton of milk. Instead, she encountered silence. A silence so deep, so unnatural, that it immediately set her nerves on edge. Her heart pounded as she made her way through the halls, noticing details that now seemed ominously out of place. A chair slightly out of position, a door left ajar, a photograph on the wall tilted as if disturbed in a struggle. Then she saw them, her parents, lying motionless, a scene so shocking it would sear itself into memory forever. Panic surged, adrenaline racing through every vein, and she fumbled for her phone, barely able to dial 911. The operator's voice, calm and professional, barely registered over the roar of terror in her ears. Within minutes, police officers arrived, their flashing lights cutting through the night like warning beacons. Reporters and neighbors would later describe the scene as like something out of a movie, but there was nothing cinematic about the pain, the fear, the confusion that hung thick in the air. What made this case even more staggering was who the suspected perpetrator was. Someone no one could have imagined. A son, a sibling, someone whose face was familiar, whose voice was trusted. And the allegations? They were beyond comprehension. First-degree murder with special circumstances, prosecutors said. The weapon? A knife. The motive? Still shrouded in mystery. Friends and neighbors could barely speak of it without trembling, unable to reconcile the loving son they knew with the violent act that authorities alleged. But there's more, because the story doesn't end with shock alone. In the days following the tragedy, layers of secrets began to unravel. Secrets that hinted at family tensions, hidden debts, whispers of mental health struggles, and the complex web of Hollywood fame and fortune. The Reiner family was wealthy, influential, and adored by many, but like a diamond's glitter, their glittering public image concealed flaws and fractures that would now be thrust into the public eye in the most harrowing way imaginable. Think about the implications for a moment. The world watches Hollywood and sees glamour, wealth, and success. But behind those polished smiles and award show appearances, private lives often hide stories far darker than anyone expects. What pressures lead someone to commit such an unthinkable act against their own parents? How did warning signs go unnoticed, or worse, ignored? And how does a community, even a city, process the idea that evil can reside in the most familiar of places, in the very people you trust the most? The media frenzy was instantaneous. News outlets descended, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, as neighbors whispered, theories spread, and the internet erupted with speculation. Every angle was explored, from the financial dealings of the family to alleged arguments that might have escalated over the years. Lawyers prepared statements, spokespeople issued carefully worded comments, and the accused, sitting in jail, was already the center of a storm of judgment, fear, and confusion. And yet, the most chilling part of all this is what we don't know. The motive remains a mystery. The exact sequence of events is still being pieced together. Was this a moment of rage, long-simmering resentment, or something more calculated? Investigators say that every detail, every conversation, every transaction, every hidden grievance could be a crucial piece of the puzzle. And as the public, we are left to wait, watch, and wonder. Imagine the daughter, the only witness to this horrifying discovery. Every day, she must grapple with memories that no one should have to endure. The image of her parents lying lifeless, the shock of calling for help, the endless questions from detectives, reporters, and neighbors. Trauma, grief, and fear now define her world, and every revelation that emerges from the investigation threatens to reopen wounds she cannot yet begin to heal. But perhaps the most disturbing thought of all is that this story is only just beginning. Because the first shock, the act itself, is only the surface. Beneath it lies a tangle of secrets, betrayals, and hidden truths that no one could have predicted. Friends who seemed loyal, siblings who seemed supportive, all may have roles to play in the unraveling saga. And as investigators dig deeper, every statement, every alibi, every contradiction will bring us closer to answers, and possibly reveal horrors even more unimaginable. So, let me ask you, if this could happen in a family as seemingly perfect as the Reiners, what does it say about the world we live in? How well do we really know the people closest to us? And how quickly can life, as we know it, be shattered by an act of violence that no one saw coming? This story is a journey into the heart of darkness, set against the backdrop of wealth, fame, and the fragile facade of family perfection. It's a tale that will take you from shock to disbelief, from grief to anger, and from the comfort of certainty into the dizzying chaos of unanswered questions. And the most important truth to remember, nothing is as it seems. Every revelation leads to more questions. Every answer uncovers more lies. Every step closer to the truth is a step further into a story that is as twisted as it is tragic. By the end of this hour, you will know pieces of the story no one expected. You will understand the complexity of family secrets, the pressures of wealth and fame, and the terrifying reality that sometimes evil doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people we love most. The Reiner family mansion sat like a gleaming fortress on the Brentwood Hills, its modernist lines cutting sharply against the fading sunset. From the outside, everything was pristine. The manicured gardens, the shimmering pool, the perfectly parked luxury cars, it all screamed perfection. Passers-by would see only wealth and success, the kind of image Hollywood thrives on. But as anyone who has studied the lives behind the silver screen knows, appearances can be deceiving. Inside, the story was far more complicated. The family patriarch, Victor Reiner, had spent decades building a legacy in film and television, his influence reaching far beyond the studio gates. His wife, Celia, was known as the gracious socialite, a woman whose poise and elegance masked a mind that had seen far more of the industry's dark corners than most cared to admit. Together, they were admired, envied, and occasionally feared. Their children, a son, Nathan, and a daughter, Lila, grew up in a world of privilege and pressure, expected to uphold the Reiner name while navigating the treacherous waters of Hollywood life. It was Nathan, however, whose path had always been the most turbulent. Even as a child, he displayed flashes of brilliance alongside alarming mood swings. Tutors whispered about his intensity. Family friends mentioned the times he would disappear for hours, lost in thought or anger. No one truly understood him, not even his parents. And as he grew older, the tension only mounted. The night before the tragedy, the household had seemed normal, almost deceptively so. Victor and Celia hosted a small dinner party for close friends, a gathering that was elegant, understated, and seemingly devoid of the drama that often accompanied the Reiner name. Guests recalled laughter, fine wine, and subtle humor, a veneer of normalcy that would be shattered less than 24 hours later. But beneath that veneer, cracks were forming. Nathan had been increasingly withdrawn in recent months. There were arguments that neighbors overheard, though details remained vague. He had been seen pacing late at night, muttering to himself, his eyes haunted by thoughts no one could reach. And yet, to the casual observer, it was easy to dismiss these signs. After all, Hollywood families were always dramatic. Or so the world believed. In the days that followed, investigators would uncover a series of disturbing clues pointing to deep-rooted familial tension. Emails, text messages, and private notes painted a picture of a family struggling under the weight of expectation, privilege, and unresolved anger. Nathan had been in conflict with his parents over finances, personal decisions, and his future in the shadow of Victor's towering career. And while these disagreements alone could never justify the horrors that followed, they offered the first glimpse into a pressure cooker that may have exploded in unimaginable ways. The mansion itself became a central character in the unfolding drama. Every room, every hallway, every piece of furniture held echoes of the past. The grand piano in the living room had seen laughter and tears. The library held secrets in the form of journals and letters, and the kitchen, where so many family meals were shared, now carried the haunting memory of the last time this family was together. Investigators would later note the strange positioning of certain objects, subtle disturbances that suggested a struggle, or perhaps a hurried search for something only the perpetrator knew existed. Friends and colleagues of the Reiner family were stunned. Many could not reconcile the image they had of the charming, successful family with the shocking allegations. How could a son commit such a violent act against parents who had seemingly provided everything? And yet, when pressed further, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. Nathan had confided in friends about his feelings of isolation, of being misunderstood, of living under a shadow too heavy to bear. These details, when pieced together, created a chilling context for what had transpired. Even Hollywood insiders, familiar with scandal and intrigue, were unsettled by the sheer intensity of the allegations. Some whispered about old rivalries. Others hinted at mental health struggles that had gone unnoticed or untreated. There were questions about money, inheritance, and the psychological pressures of growing up in the public eye. And while the public demanded clear answers, those closest to the family understood that the truth was layered, complex, and far from simple. The morning after the tragedy, detectives combed the mansion for evidence. Every inch was photographed, every surface examined. They noted the subtle clues that only a trained eye could see: a smudge on a door frame, a faint trace of blood in a seldom-used hallway, signs that the perpetrator may have tried to clean up after themselves. Each finding raised more questions than answers. How could someone plan such an act? Was it premeditated, or had a moment of rage spiraled out of control? And why Nathan, the son? Why not someone else, if there had been conflicts in the household? The community reacted with shock and disbelief. Neighbors who had waved at the family for years were suddenly faced with the terrifying possibility that evil had been hiding in plain sight. Social media exploded with speculation, theories ranging from the plausible to the absurd. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, but no one had the full picture. And as authorities worked to untangle the web of motives and actions, the sense of unease only grew. For Nathan, now in custody, life had changed irrevocably. Even the most mundane aspects of existence, meals, sleep, conversation, were filtered through the lens of accusation and suspicion. Friends and family were divided, some expressing disbelief, others confronting the possibility of long-suspected truths. And while the legal process would take months, even years, the emotional fallout was immediate and devastating. Perhaps the most haunting element of all was the silence that followed. Not just the literal silence of the mansion after the tragedy, but the silence of understanding. How could anyone truly comprehend the mind of someone capable of such an act? How do you reconcile the love you felt for a family member with the horror of what they are alleged to have done? And how do you continue to live in a world where such violence seems possible, even inevitable? By the time the sun rose fully over Brentwood, casting its golden light across the hills, the Reiner estate had become a symbol. A symbol of wealth and privilege, yes, but also of fragility. Of secrets hidden behind smiles, of pressures unseen behind polished facades. And as the investigation continued, more layers of the story began to surface. Layers that no one could have predicted, each one revealing the tension, the fear, and the human frailty that had been building for years. And just when it seemed that the first shocks had passed, detectives discovered a note tucked away in an unexpected location. Its contents were cryptic, yet they hinted at motives, emotions, and conflicts that had remained hidden. The note, short but deeply unsettling, suggested that the tragedy was not an isolated incident, that events leading up to it had been simmering, invisible to everyone except those living it. The family, the mansion, the friends, the neighbors, the city itself. All were now participants in a story that would unravel slowly, painfully, and with twists that no one could foresee. Each revelation would challenge assumptions, provoke outrage, and deepen the mystery. And through it all, one question lingered. Could the truth ever truly be known? But just as the investigators were beginning to piece together the puzzle, they uncovered something even more shocking. Something that would change the entire narrative of that night, something that no one had expected, and something that would leave everyone asking the same chilling question. What really happened inside the Reiner mansion? The Reiner family's public image had always been flawless. Flawless in photos, flawless in interviews, flawless in every carefully curated social media post. The city of Los Angeles knew them as a power couple who had built an empire in Hollywood. Victor Reiner, with his decades of studio experience, was the kind of producer whose mere handshake could open doors. Celia, elegant, poised, and articulate, had cultivated an image of social grace while managing charities, events, and philanthropic efforts. On the surface, they were the ideal couple. But as the saying goes, the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. Behind the perfectly edited Instagram posts and red carpet appearances, the Reiners' lives were far more complicated than anyone could imagine. In Chapter 2, we begin to unravel the tension that had been quietly building for years, tension that no amount of fame or fortune could disguise. It started with Nathan, their son. While Victor was often praised for his professional acumen, Nathan had grown increasingly restless, navigating the pressures of legacy and expectation. Every family gathering was a balancing act, pleasing parents, maintaining appearances, and managing his own inner turmoil. Friends who had known him for years noticed subtle shifts. Irritability where once there was charm, bursts of anger where once there was laughter, and increasingly frequent disappearances for hours at a time. Some dismissed it as the struggles of a young adult, others whispered quietly about mental health concerns. But no one could have predicted the violent turn his life would take. Meanwhile, Lila, the Reiner's daughter, had a different relationship with her parents. Outwardly, she seemed to embody the perfect image of the family, poised, intelligent, and successful. Yet even she had noticed small cracks, hidden arguments, and tensions that seemed to linger beneath the surface. She recalled, in interviews with investigators, moments of subtle discord. Hushed discussions behind closed doors, a shadow crossing Victor's face during dinners, Celia's anxious glances at Nathan when he entered a room. These moments, seemingly insignificant at the time, were the first hints of a storm that no one would see coming. Financial pressures also played a role in the household's mounting tension. Although the Reiners were wealthy, money was never simply in abundance, it was a battleground. Investments, inheritance expectations, and business dealings created friction. Nathan, increasingly frustrated with the lack of control over his own future, clashed with Victor over business plans. Disputes that once might have ended in a quiet compromise escalated into heated arguments, leaving lingering resentment. And while Celia often mediated, her attempts to maintain peace sometimes fell short, and the family dynamic grew increasingly volatile. The night of the tragedy, sources later claimed, was no ordinary night. Observers would piece together accounts of conversations filled with tension, hints of unresolved arguments, and subtle threats masked by polite tones. The family's social circle, once filled with laughter and camaraderie, became a network of whispers and uneasy glances. Friends would later reflect on noticing Nathan's increasing withdrawal, his restless pacing during gatherings, and his reluctance to share meals or engage in conversations. Some saw these as signs of rebellion or adolescent angst. Others suspected something more serious, though no one could articulate it fully. Investigators would later uncover that Nathan had been keeping private journals that, once read, revealed a complex emotional landscape. Anger, jealousy, confusion, and fear were interwoven with reflections on love, regret, and loyalty. Some entries hinted at a deep resentment toward his parents' authority, while others suggested guilt, anxiety, and self-doubt. Each page, when examined carefully, offered insights into a young man struggling with forces larger than himself: fame, family expectations, and personal identity. In the mansion itself, the investigators noted subtle clues about the household's dynamics. In the living room, chairs were slightly misaligned, as though moved during an argument. In the study, papers and documents were scattered in a way that suggested tension or hurried movement. In the kitchen, a coffee cup with dried fingerprints hinted at late-night discussions or disagreements. Each of these small details would later become critical pieces of evidence, suggesting that the violence that occurred was neither sudden nor completely unprovoked. The neighbors, meanwhile, offered accounts that added complexity to the story. They described hearing loud voices in the evenings, doors slamming, and footsteps echoing through the hallways at odd hours. Some spoke of Nathan's temper, noting times when he stormed out of the house or shouted during arguments. Others described Celia's calm attempts to de-escalate tensions, often standing quietly in hallways, her expressions betraying worry. Victor, in contrast, was described as more authoritative, often issuing firm commands and struggling to tolerate dissent. These observations, when combined, painted a picture of a family in which love and tension coexisted uneasily, setting the stage for the catastrophic events to come. Even beyond the mansion, the Reiner family's influence in Hollywood magnified every action, every secret, every whisper. Studio executives, agents, and colleagues watched events unfold with a mix of horror and fascination. Rumors of conflicts over contracts, film rights, and creative control swirled, hinting that professional pressures may have contributed to personal tension. While it would be impossible to draw a direct line from business disputes to the tragedy, the intersections of fame, wealth, and power created an environment where grievances could fester, unseen and unresolved. As the investigation deepened, detectives discovered a series of cryptic phone messages and emails. Some were mundane, reminders about appointments, meetings, or family obligations. Others were far more troubling, hinting at underlying tension, resentment, or desperation. One message, in particular, stood out, a line that suggested Nathan felt trapped, unheard, and invisible within his own family. Whether this message represented mere frustration or a warning of something far more dangerous became a central question for investigators and the public alike. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the Nathan they knew with the Nathan accused. Some remembered moments of kindness, moments of creativity, moments of humor that seemed at odds with the dark allegations. Others recalled warning signs, moments that now, in hindsight, appeared ominous. The duality of perception. How a person could appear loving and troubled simultaneously became a recurring theme in media coverage, social commentary, and public discussion. Yet even as the layers of family tension, financial pressure, and emotional turmoil came to light, one mystery remained. Why that night? Why the moment that changed everything? Detectives and psychologists alike pondered this question, exploring triggers, catalysts, and environmental factors. Was it a long-planned act, a sudden eruption of suppressed anger, or something more sinister? And crucially, what could have been done to prevent it? The chapter closes with an ominous discovery. Among Nathan's belongings, investigators found an envelope, carefully tucked behind a stack of old photographs. Its contents were shocking: drawings, notes, and scribbles that suggested a mind wrestling with thoughts too heavy to express in words alone. The envelope offered a glimpse into the psychological state that may have driven Nathan toward the unimaginable, yet it raised more questions than it answered. What did these cryptic messages mean? Who, if anyone, could have interpreted them before it was too late? And perhaps most chilling of all, were these signs of a larger, hidden turmoil that extended beyond the walls of the Reiner mansion? The answers to these questions would slowly emerge, each revelation more disturbing than the last. And just when it seemed the first pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, detectives uncovered another layer of secrets, a connection that no one had anticipated and that would turn the story on its head. By the third day after the tragedy, the Reiner mansion had become a fortress of questions. Media vans lined the quiet streets of Brentwood, their satellite dishes pointing skyward as journalists scrambled for the smallest detail. Helicopters hovered overhead, a constant reminder that the world was watching, waiting, and speculating. Inside, the once majestic estate felt suffocating, the walls echoing memories of laughter, arguments, and now, horror. What no one outside those walls fully realized was that the Reiner family had long been grappling with conflicts that were invisible to the public eye. Friends and acquaintances often described the Reiners as a perfect Hollywood family, but perfection, as the saying goes, is often a facade. The reality, now emerging through interviews, notes, and recovered documents, was far more complicated, far darker, and far more human than the public had imagined. Nathan's adolescence and early adulthood had been marked by exceptional talent intertwined with extreme volatility. While he was undeniably bright, capable of remarkable insights and artistic expression, his behavior often veered into unpredictable extremes. School records and tutors' notes revealed both praise and caution, remarks about brilliance counterbalanced by observations of mood swings, intense anger, and periods of withdrawal. In hindsight, these were signs of a young man struggling to reconcile his identity with the towering expectations of a powerful family. Meanwhile, the relationship between Victor and Nathan had been increasingly strained. Victor, the family patriarch, was a man accustomed to control in the boardroom, on film sets, and even in his household. To him, order was paramount, and deviation from his expectations often met with stern disapproval. Nathan, naturally independent and fiercely intelligent, frequently pushed against these boundaries. What may have seemed like minor disagreements to outsiders were, in reality, intense conflicts that escalated in private, leaving emotional scars that only deepened over time. Celia, the matriarch, had been the family's emotional anchor for years, a calming presence amid the chaos. She often attempted to mediate, to soften conflicts and preserve familial harmony. But even her patience had limits. Friends later described moments when she retreated into silence, her attempts at peace thwarted by escalating arguments between her husband and son. Celia's own notes, later discovered by investigators, suggested a deep awareness of underlying tensions, a quiet fear that something terrible might occur if issues were left unresolved. The mansion itself revealed subtle evidence of these family dynamics. Rooms bore traces of hurried departures or hidden conflicts. In the library, books were slightly out of place, suggesting frustration or searching. The living room showed signs of recent arguments, minor disturbances hinting at anger or tension. Small details, seemingly mundane, became crucial pieces of the puzzle, providing investigators with a timeline of emotional energy within the household. As the investigation unfolded, the detectives discovered a series of cryptic correspondences that painted a picture of long-term psychological strain. Nathan had exchanged notes and messages with a circle of friends and confidants, some of whom expressed concern over his mental state. There were mentions of feeling trapped, unheard, and invisible, phrases that might seem ordinary but, when examined collectively, revealed a deeply troubled mindset. These messages suggested not only anger and frustration, but also a sense of alienation, a perception that the world, including his family, failed to see him fully. Lila, the daughter, became a key source of insight. Her interviews revealed a young woman caught between love, loyalty, and horror. She recalled instances of whispered arguments at night, subtle signs of tension that she had dismissed in her youth. She described moments when Nathan's mood seemed to shift without warning, periods of intense isolation, and times when Victor's authority clashed violently with Nathan's independence. These recollections offered investigators vital context, illustrating how emotional patterns within the family may have laid the groundwork for the tragedy that followed. Financial pressures added another layer of complexity. While the Reiners were undeniably wealthy, internal disagreements over money, investments, and inheritance expectations created friction. Nathan reportedly felt constrained by his parents' control over finances and his role within the family business. Correspondence and text messages later revealed disputes over decisions that, to Nathan, felt like an infringement on autonomy and personal agency. Investigators considered whether these disputes, while not directly violent, contributed to escalating resentment and emotional tension. In addition to familial strain, outside influences played a role. Hollywood, a city built on appearances, power, and reputation, exerted constant pressure on the Reiner family. Agents, business partners, and industry colleagues added expectations, deadlines, and scrutiny, compounding the family's internal stress. Nathan, in particular, may have felt the weight of this external gaze, struggling to maintain personal identity amid the demands of family legacy and public expectation. Even the smallest details of daily life reflected underlying tensions. Staff members and neighbors later recounted peculiar observations. Moments of silence broken by heated whispers, unusual comings and goings at odd hours, and small disruptions within the mansion that suggested hidden conflicts. Each account, when combined with physical evidence and recovered communications, created a layered portrait of a household fraught with tension, anxiety, and the potential for catastrophe. The night of the tragedy itself revealed additional complexities. Investigators noted subtle disturbances in multiple rooms, suggesting movement, conflict, and possibly an emotional struggle. Although the exact sequence of events would remain under investigation for months, these small signs provided clues about the emotional state of the family and the intensity of the interactions leading up to the incident. Each clue raised questions. Had the confrontation been planned, or did it erupt spontaneously? What role did prior emotional conflicts play in the escalation? And most importantly, could anyone have anticipated the horror that followed? Just when it seemed that the investigators were beginning to assemble a coherent picture, they discovered something deeply unsettling. Evidence suggesting that Nathan may have been aware of potential consequences but unable to control the trajectory of his actions. Personal notes hinted at a psychological struggle, a battle between rational thought and overwhelming emotion. Experts called it a portrait of a mind at war with itself, and it raised troubling questions about the nature of responsibility, intention, and human behavior. Friends of Nathan struggled to reconcile this version of him with the person they believed they knew. He had shown kindness, creativity, and humor, but these traits coexisted with frustration, anger, and feelings of isolation. This duality, the simultaneous capacity for warmth and violence, became a central theme in public discussion and media coverage, challenging simple narratives about the tragedy. How can one person embody such extremes? How can love and fear coexist so tightly within a single individual? As the chapter closes, a new discovery rocked the investigation. Hidden within a seldom-used room of the mansion, detectives found a collection of documents, notes, and sketches that pointed to long-standing psychological distress. The items suggested not only anger and resentment, but also confusion, fear, and perhaps a sense of inevitability. Whoever created them had been grappling with internal conflict for months, maybe years, and now the world would see its consequences. The chilling question remained. Had anyone recognized these warning signs before it was too late? Could this tragedy have been prevented? And as authorities pieced together the story, one thought loomed over every decision, every interview, and every clue. The Reiner family was not just a household. It was a house of secrets, and every secret carried the potential for devastating consequences. But just as investigators began to focus on these new findings, they stumbled upon something even more shocking. A discovery that would rewrite the narrative entirely, a secret that no one could have anticipated, and a twist that would leave everyone wondering what really happened in the Reiner mansion that night. By the fourth day following the tragedy, the Reiner mansion had become more than a crime scene. It was a symbol of secrecy, tension, and the hidden lives of Hollywood elites. Every creaking floorboard, every closed door, every overlooked corner seemed to whisper the story of a family that had lived under the weight of unspoken truths. And as investigators delved deeper, they realized the surface narrative, the family known to the world, was only part of the story. Beneath it lay a web of lies, deceit, and betrayal that no one could have anticipated. It began with the discovery of communication records. Emails, texts, and messages that revealed a history of hidden conflicts. Some messages were mundane, seemingly routine reminders of social events or business dealings. Others were cryptic, loaded with emotion, hints of resentment, and veiled threats. Certain exchanges between Nathan and acquaintances suggested a growing sense of isolation, frustration, and anger that had intensified over months. For investigators, these communications painted a picture of a young man struggling to reconcile his own identity with the expectations of a family and a city that demanded perfection. Celia and Victor, despite their polished public personas, were not immune to these tensions. Friends revealed that behind closed doors, disagreements over money, career choices, and lifestyle had long simmered beneath the veneer of a harmonious family. Victor, who had spent decades cultivating influence and authority, had little patience for what he perceived as rebellion or failure. Celia, ever the mediator, often found herself navigating a delicate balance between maintaining peace and asserting her own perspective. Yet even her patience had limits, and the family dynamic had reached a point where arguments, though often subtle, were emotionally charged and increasingly frequent. Nathan's isolation had become more pronounced in the months leading up to the tragedy. Teachers, tutors, and friends noted his withdrawal, his reluctance to engage in conversation, and his tendency to retreat into solitude. At the same time, moments of brilliance and charm persisted, making his behavior seem inconsistent and unpredictable. This duality, the coexistence of warmth and volatility, left those around him unsure how to respond. Could intervention have prevented the eventual tragedy, or was it a culmination of forces beyond anyone's control? The mansion itself provided clues about the underlying conflict. Investigators noted subtle disturbances throughout the house. A chair pushed aside as if in anger, a book left open in the middle of a sentence, and faint marks on walls that suggested hurried movement. Each detail, when examined in context, revealed the emotional turbulence that had been building quietly for years. Even the layout of the rooms, the separation of personal spaces, the closed doors, the locked cabinets, suggested boundaries and barriers that may have contributed to misunderstanding, frustration, and isolation. Outside the mansion, the broader community began to piece together the implications of the tragedy. Neighbors recounted moments that, in retrospect, seemed ominous. Raised voices echoing through the halls late at night, hurried exits from the house, and brief but intense confrontations that were quickly hushed. Friends of the family described Nathan's increasing detachment, his reluctance to participate in family events, and a subtle but growing tension between him and Victor. Each anecdote, though small in isolation, contributed to a portrait of a household fraught with conflict, pressure, and unspoken grievances. The financial dimension of the family dynamic also came under scrutiny. Although the Reiners were wealthy, their fortune had become a source of tension rather than comfort. Inheritance disputes, disagreements over investments, and conflicts about the future of the family's business empire had intensified the emotional strain. Nathan, who had long felt constrained by his parents' expectations, reportedly expressed frustration over what he perceived as control and limitation. These disputes, while not directly violent, may have fueled resentment and contributed to the psychological state that led to the night of the tragedy. The investigation uncovered additional evidence of secrecy, hidden journals, coded messages, and private notes tucked away in personal spaces. Nathan had documented thoughts and emotions in ways that were both revealing and disturbing. Anger, confusion, fear, and resentment were interwoven with moments of reflection, regret, and even guilt. These writings suggested a complex internal struggle, a battle between emotion and rational thought, that ultimately may have influenced his actions. Investigators noted that these documents were critical to understanding not just the events themselves, but the psychological landscape in which they occurred. Lila, the daughter, provided crucial insights into the family's hidden conflicts. In interviews, she described subtle signs of tension she had witnessed over the years. Hushed arguments, fleeting expressions of frustration, and moments when Nathan's behavior seemed inexplicably volatile. She recounted times when Celia's attempts to mediate fell short, and when Victor's strict authority only escalated conflicts. These observations, though seemingly minor at the time, formed an essential context for understanding the emotional dynamics that may have contributed to the night's tragic events. Hollywood's glare added yet another layer of complexity. The Reiners were not just a family, they were a public institution, scrutinized by media, peers, and fans alike. This constant attention amplified existing tensions, making private disagreements feel public and private failures seem monumental. Agents, producers, and industry colleagues exerted pressures that compounded the family's internal struggles. In a world where image and reputation were paramount, the personal and professional boundaries often blurred, creating fertile ground for conflict. The chapter reaches a turning point with the discovery of a hidden folder on a private computer. Its contents were shocking: drafts of letters, half-finished diaries, and carefully composed notes revealing long-standing grievances, moments of despair, and cryptic warnings. The writings suggested not just anger toward Victor and Celia, but a deep sense of alienation from the world around him. Each page offered a glimpse into a mind grappling with emotions too intense to articulate, and into a family dynamic that may have been unknowingly pushing a loved one toward an unimaginable act. Friends and neighbors were left grappling with disbelief. How could someone so intelligent, creative, and loved by those closest to him commit such a violent act? And yet, the evidence painted a picture of a young man caught in a storm of pressure, expectation, and unresolved conflict, a storm that no one could fully understand until it had reached its terrifying climax. Just as it seemed that the immediate layers of family tension were being understood, investigators uncovered something even more shocking: a secret connection between Nathan and an external influence that no one had suspected. This revelation suggested that the web of loyalties, both inside and outside the family, was more complex than anyone had imagined. It hinted at manipulation, hidden alliances, and pressures beyond the household itself. And then came the final discovery of the day: a series of messages that suggested Nathan had been planning aspects of the night in advance, not with clarity, but in a fog of confusion and conflicting emotion. The messages were cryptic, revealing glimpses of intent, desperation, and turmoil. They raised profound questions about free will, influence, and the boundaries between thought and action. By the end of Chapter 5, the investigation had shifted from a simple understanding of family tension to the realization that the Reiner tragedy was the product of multiple, intertwined forces. Fractured loyalties, hidden resentments, external pressures, and secret influences converged to create a perfect storm, one that no one had seen coming until it was too late. The Reiner mansion had transformed from a symbol of privilege into a labyrinth of secrets. Each investigation revealed a layer more complicated than the last, as if the family itself had been concealing truths not just from the world, but from each other. By this stage, the case was no longer simply about a tragic act within a family. It was about a network of hidden alliances, unspoken agreements, and subtle manipulations that had quietly governed the household for years. Nathan, still grappling with the consequences of that fateful night, had become the focal point of attention. But the more investigators learned, the more they realized that understanding Nathan alone was insufficient. The dynamics between family members, friends, and even peripheral influences were crucial to piecing together the full picture. Every interaction, every exchange, every small act of loyalty or betrayal became a potential clue in understanding the trajectory that had led to tragedy. At the heart of these revelations were relationships that had previously gone unnoticed. Certain family friends, business associates, and even distant relatives appeared to have played a role in shaping the household's dynamics. While some acted as mediators or peacemakers, others may have inadvertently fueled tension, whether through advice, criticism, or simply the presence of conflicting agendas. Each layer of connection offered both insight and complication, blurring the lines between loyalty and manipulation. Inside the mansion, investigators discovered subtle signs that hinted at these alliances. A misplaced document, an overlooked email, or a whispered conversation recorded on security cameras painted a picture of influence that extended beyond the immediate family. Some messages suggested clandestine meetings or advice given in confidence, exchanges that may have had unintended consequences. Every detail pointed to a network of influence that had, knowingly or unknowingly, contributed to Nathan's state of mind leading up to the tragedy. Friends and neighbors began to share accounts that, at first, seemed contradictory but gradually revealed patterns of behavior. Some described Nathan as deeply conflicted, torn between the love he felt for his family and the frustration over their expectations. Others spoke of subtle pressures from external figures, mentors, agents, or acquaintances, whose intentions were not always clear. This duality of influence created a sense of disorientation. Who could be trusted and whose advice had played a role in the events that unfolded? Financial ties further complicated the web of hidden alliances. Investigators noted that investments, trusts, and inheritance plans were not simply family matters. They involved external advisors, lawyers, and business partners. Nathan's frustration over perceived restrictions on his autonomy intersected with these external influences, adding a layer of complexity to the already tense household dynamic. The overlap between personal resentment and professional pressure created fertile ground for emotional escalation. Even the mansion's physical layout contributed to the story. Certain rooms, long used for private meetings or confidential conversations, had become spaces where hidden alliances were reinforced. Investigators noted patterns: letters tucked away in study drawers, conversations held in the library under the guise of casual discussion, and messages left in places unlikely to be discovered. These hidden channels of communication suggested a family and a network of associates operating on multiple levels: emotional, practical, and secretive. The psychological implications were staggering. Nathan, caught between conflicting loyalties and hidden pressures, appeared to be navigating a world where no one's intentions were entirely transparent. He struggled to discern who genuinely supported him, who subtly manipulated him, and who remained indifferent to his internal turmoil. Each alliance, each connection, created additional layers of tension, isolation, and confusion, factors that investigators believe may have contributed to the night's tragic outcome. As the investigation progressed, authorities discovered encrypted messages and journals hinting at interactions Nathan had with external figures outside the immediate family circle. Some were described as mentors or trusted advisors. Others were more enigmatic, offering cryptic guidance or unspoken influence. Each interaction left an imprint on Nathan's mindset, shaping decisions, fueling doubts, and deepening emotional strain. The boundaries between family loyalty, friendship, and influence blurred, creating a psychological environment that was volatile and difficult to navigate. Lila, increasingly involved in the investigation, provided critical insight into the hidden alliances. She recounted moments when Nathan appeared conflicted after speaking with certain friends or acquaintances, suggesting that external advice or pressure had an impact on his emotional state. These revelations underscored the notion that the tragedy was not solely the result of internal family dynamics. Rather, it was a convergence of internal and external influences that had created a perfect storm. The media, sensing the complexity, began to amplify the narrative of hidden alliances. Public speculation suggested everything from covert financial schemes to secretive mentorships and clandestine meetings. While many details remained unverified, the pattern was clear. Nathan's actions were influenced by a multitude of forces, some benevolent, others ambiguous, and some potentially destructive. Each revelation heightened public fascination while deepening the mystery surrounding the Reiner family. The chapter reached its climax with the discovery of a series of notebooks, each filled with cryptic writings that hinted at multiple layers of influence. Nathan had documented thoughts, reflections, and observations about loyalty, trust, and the complicated nature of human relationships. These notes revealed a mind wrestling with contradictions, love and resentment, dependence and rebellion, fear and defiance. Investigators recognized that these writings were a key to understanding not only Nathan's psychology, but also the network of hidden alliances that had shaped his behavior. And just when it seemed the web had been fully uncovered, authorities stumbled upon an even more startling revelation: evidence suggesting that one of these hidden alliances may have played a direct role in the escalation of events leading to the tragedy. Whether intentional or inadvertent, the impact of this connection was profound, forcing investigators to reassess their understanding of causality, responsibility, and influence. The questions now loomed larger than ever. Could anyone have predicted the culmination of these hidden alliances? Were the pressures Nathan faced outside the family as consequential as those within? And as the investigation prepared to enter its next phase, one chilling thought persisted. The deeper they looked, the darker and more convoluted the story became. A story in which no one, not even the investigators themselves, could predict the full consequences of what had transpired. Something unseen, something manipulative, and something profoundly impactful had guided the events that night. And just as the authorities were beginning to trace its origins, a discovery emerged that would shatter assumptions, rewrite narratives, and leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about the Reiner family. The night that would forever alter the Reiner family's legacy began like any other in Brentwood. Quiet, seemingly ordinary, with the warm glow of streetlights spilling over manicured lawns. But within the Reiner mansion, the calm was a thin veil. Beneath the surface, tension simmered, emotion pulsed, and a series of small, seemingly inconsequential events began to align in ways no one could have predicted. Nathan had been restless all evening. Friends later recounted that he had spent the afternoon in isolation, pacing through the mansion, muttering under his breath. Those who knew him well understood that such behavior often preceded a mental storm. Moments when thoughts would spiral, emotions would flare, and the struggle between reason and impulse became intense. On that night, it would become impossible to separate rational planning from emotional reaction, and the mansion would bear witness to a confrontation decades in the making. Victor and Celia, meanwhile, were preparing for a late dinner, unaware that the night would descend into chaos. Victor, ever the authoritative patriarch, attempted to maintain a sense of normalcy, while Celia quietly observed, her instincts sensing that Nathan's agitation was more than ordinary restlessness. Lila, who had been quietly assisting her parents, noticed small signs of tension, a clenched jaw, a darting glance, hands tapping against furniture. It was the kind of tension that, in hindsight, felt like a warning, a subtle whisper of what was to come. Small incidents that would have seemed trivial on any other night began to escalate. A disagreement over trivial matters, where a misplaced object should go, how a schedule was managed, or what was said in passing, quickly intensified. Nathan's frustration grew, emotions spilling over, and Victor's attempts at authority clashed with the pent-up resentment Nathan had been harboring for months. Celia tried to mediate, her voice calm yet firm, but the momentum of tension proved difficult to slow. Investigators later pieced together the sequence of events through physical evidence, witness testimony, and Nathan's own statements. In the living room, chairs had been shifted, a lamp knocked over, and the subtle signs of struggle became apparent. Every small gesture, a slammed door, a raised voice, a step too forceful, acted as a trigger, escalating a conflict that had been simmering for years. Lila's recollections revealed moments of fear and confusion. She described watching the tension mount, noticing expressions on her parents' faces that betrayed concern and frustration. In retrospect, she realized that certain cues, subtle body language, fleeting expressions, and tones of voice had foreshadowed a catastrophic outcome. These moments, invisible to anyone outside the mansion, illustrated how ordinary domestic conflict had escalated into a tragedy. The mansion itself seemed to respond to the emotional energy. Investigators later noted subtle disturbances, a trail of objects slightly displaced, fingerprints on surfaces where hands had clutched in frustration or anger, and signs of hurried movement through hallways. Even the placement of furniture suggested that a confrontation had occurred in multiple locations, each room reflecting an emotional stage in the unfolding drama. Financial disputes, though minor in the context of the immediate evening, added fuel to the fire. Nathan's frustration with perceived restrictions on his autonomy, particularly regarding money and decision-making, resurfaced in arguments that evening. Texts and emails later recovered revealed that these tensions had been building, unspoken but potent, creating a mental framework where rational thought was increasingly overshadowed by emotion. Psychologists and criminal profilers examining the case noted the role of emotional layering. Nathan's feelings of isolation, resentment, and pressure converged in a perfect storm that evening. External influences, mentors, friends, and advisors, who had previously been supportive now contributed to a sense of internal conflict. Each small push, each piece of advice, Each subtle expectation added to the emotional charge, creating a scenario where explosive action became increasingly likely. The critical moment came suddenly. Investigators describe a confrontation in the main hallway, where Nathan and Victor faced each other, tension tangible in every movement. Voices raised, gestures became more forceful, and emotion overwhelmed reason. Celia attempted to intervene, stepping between them, her voice urgent yet calm. But the momentum of accumulated resentment proved unstoppable. What happened next would define the family's tragedy forever. Physical evidence later suggested a struggle. Objects knocked over, marks on walls, and subtle displacements indicated that what began as verbal confrontation escalated into physical interaction. Each detail provided clues not only to the sequence of events, but also to the emotional intensity of the moment. A combination of fear, anger, and desperation that had been building for months, if not years. Nathan's psychological state during the confrontation became a focal point for investigators. Witness accounts and recovered journals suggested that he had been experiencing heightened emotional distress, difficulty regulating anger, and a sense of inevitability about the unfolding events. These factors, combined with the family's internal tensions and external pressures, created a scenario in which rational decision-making was compromised and tragic action became almost inevitable. The aftermath of the confrontation left the mansion in chaos. Evidence suggested that Celia attempted to calm the situation, to reason with Nathan, to prevent the escalation from becoming catastrophic. But in moments of extreme emotional charge, such attempts often fail, and the results were devastating. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence, noting that the tragic outcome was the result of a complex interplay of emotion, psychology, and environmental factors. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the Nathan they knew with the Nathan involved in the tragedy. On the surface, he had been thoughtful, intelligent, and capable of love and creativity. But the events of that night revealed a side shaped by frustration, isolation, and intense emotional strain, a duality that shocked everyone who had known him. This contrast between public perception and private reality became central to understanding the Reiner tragedy. As Chapter 7 closes, investigators discovered a detail that would change the narrative entirely, a note, hidden in plain sight, that suggested premeditation, intent, or at least awareness of the potential consequences. Its contents were cryptic, yet chilling, hinting at motivations and emotions that had remained obscured until that moment. The mansion, once a symbol of affluence and charm, now stood as a testament to the fragility of human emotion, the consequences of unspoken grievances, and the hidden tensions that can erupt in the most devastating ways. And as authorities prepared to move into the next phase of investigation, one chilling realization remained. What had been revealed so far was only the beginning, and the darkest, most shocking truths were still hidden just beyond the surface.